Feed to Sandin. Back now to Strom. Coming down the middle. A shot. A save. Rebound. They score! Connor McMichael able to put it home on the overtime game-winning goal. Good morning. Good afternoon. And good night, Montreal. The Capitals come all the way back. 2 in the third. McMichael in overtime. 3-2 the final here at Capital One Arena.
John Walton with the call. 37 and a half seconds were left in overtime when Connor McMichael got his first ever overtime winning goal. The Caps beat the Canadiens 3-2, but man, in the Eastern Conference, there are some teams that are rolling right now. Tampa's won 11 in a row. Carolina's been playing well until very recently. The Caps are 6 points back in the Metropolitan. I'm great at reading and looking and recapping NHL standings. Good morning, everybody. I'm back. Thanks to Toby for sitting in. Max is with me. 2 guests on the show today. Nick Farabaugh from PennLive.com in Pittsburgh. He covers the Steelers. He's on that beat every day. We'll talk to him in about a half an hour about the Mike Tomlin exit after 19 years. And then Steve Sands will jump on with us sometime, I think, in the 11 o'clock hour. Brooks Koepka is back on the PGA Tour. There are some stipulations, and there are a few other invites to a few other players to come back on the PGA Tour, but there are other exclusions. It's an interesting time on the PGA Tour as they get ready to kick off the meat of their schedule, certainly with the tournament out at the Sony Open in Hawaii. I was not here yesterday. I do have to just take a minute on the last wild card weekend game because I didn't have a chance to weigh in on it on the air yesterday. That was one of the most dominant defensive performances I think I have ever watched. Houston is an absolute wrecking ball right now on defense. With that said, CJ Stroud could cost them a Super Bowl this year. They have a Super Bowl defense. There is no doubt about it. And actually, they're pretty good offensively when Stroud throws it to his team or when he holds on to snaps or holds on to the ball under pressure in the pocket. Now, Nico Collins was concussed. We'll see if he's available for the game Sunday in Foxborough. But that was a level of defensive destruction that I don't know that I've seen other than maybe what Seattle did to San Francisco a couple of weeks ago or what Philly did to Kansas City in the Super Bowl. Rodgers was pressured a career-high 46% of his dropbacks. It was really, really fun to watch if you've got Houston to win the AFC Championship at 30-1. It wasn't so much fun if you had Pittsburgh +3. I was on both sides of those. Pittsburgh plus the 3, but I've also got the Texans AFC Championship ticket. By the way, I did hedge hard. You know I like the Steelers plus the number, Max, on Monday night.
It's true.
So I hedged big time in the event that they won the game. I was looking for that loss by 2 or 1. That would have been the perfect loss. I would have taken a loss by 3. And there was a chance when they were down 17-6 and driving, maybe a little touchdown, 2-point conversion, but they were not sniffing that end zone. I'm telling you, that team's defense, watching their 2 edge rushers, I can't remember the last time there were 2 dominant edge rushers like Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter on the same team at the same time. I mean, you probably have to go way back in the day where you could afford to keep players of that level on the same team. Not to mention their secondary. Everybody hits. That is a fascinating matchup. Now, it's going to be a different matchup for Houston because the quarterback is mobile, and you almost have to have a mobile quarterback against Houston to have a chance. There's no chance that you're going to get anything open immediately. And then here comes the rush. So the quarterback's going to have to be able to create off schedule, something I think Drake May does very well. Not to mention they're facing a much better coordinator as well. I would certainly take Josh McDaniel over Arthur Smith against this Houston defense any day of the week. I'm excited about the playoff bracket. I hope Josh Allen's healthy. I hope a guy like Nico Collins is healthy. I want to see all 8 teams as healthy as they can be. We know that San Francisco will be without George Kittle. Devastating injury from the Philadelphia game. But I had to start with just, you and I made a call in early to mid-November that Houston was a Super Bowl contender. And at that point, they had a losing record, or they were just 500. They had maybe battled back to get to 500. And it was the night after that Buffalo game, or maybe it was a little bit earlier. I was talking about their defense all along, but after that Buffalo game, I said, I just watched a team that absolutely can win the Super Bowl this year. Stroud is he's streaky. On one hand, it's like you can't put the ball on the ground 5 times. If you count all of the snaps that he didn't handle, and none of them were terrible snaps, he put the ball on the ground in that game Monday night, officially, based on the number of fumbles that show up in the box score. He put the ball on the ground 5 times and lost 2 of them. And he threw an interception in the red zone. And yet, you want to hear this? His QBR in the game was 62.4. And the reason for that is he made some really good throws in the game. Really good throws under pressure. Christian Kirk had himself a game, didn't he? I'll tell you what, too, man. DeMeco Ryans, does he get enough credit? He's won 3 playoff games in his first 3 years of coaching with a rookie quarterback, a second-year quarterback, and now a third-year quarterback. Yeah, sure. Who was injured and missed 3 full games, but really 3.5. Because the game in which he got injured against Denver in a great football game this year. That was back in November as well, early November, late October. And it was a vicious game. I mean, both of those defenses, the hitting, and he got knocked out and was out for the next 3 games. Davis Mills came in and quarterbacked Houston to 2 wins in their next 3. That was crucial for them. Clearly, they wouldn't be in the postseason if it weren't for Davis Mills. Tommy asked me yesterday, if Stroud puts the ball on the ground or throws a pick or has a couple of turnovers early against New England, would they think about going to Mills? No, they would not. CJ Stroud's a talent. He makes big throws and makes big plays. He also keeps the other team in the game with some of his boneheaded plays. That cannot happen against a team. I don't think it can against a team like the Patriots. That'd be too much to overcome. That's a hell of a game. We knew the other 3 matchups already, starting with Denver and Buffalo on Saturday. So, now we know the lineup. We didn't know that on Monday's show. Buffalo, Denver first. By the way, that line has shifted now 3 points. It's gone from Buffalo as a 1.5-point favorite to Denver as a 1.5-point favorite. And then Saturday night, we've got Seattle as a 7.5-point favorite at home against the Niners. I mean, are we going to see what we saw 2 weeks ago? Because if we see that, the score won't be 13-3. It'll be 30-3. But you can't count Kyle Shanahan out of anything. And then Sam Darnold is sketchy in spots. So I'm not sold on Darnold yet. Not even close. Then Sunday, we get Houston, New England at 3, and then Rams, Bears. New England, by the way, a 3-point favorite over the Texans. And then the Bears are home dogs for a second straight playoff game. They're 3.5-point dogs against the Rams, a game in which the temperature at kickoff projected to be 14 degrees, but below 0 wind chills at Soldier Field. was it 2 years ago that Kansas City played the game against Miami 6 below? I think it was the third coldest game in NFL history, maybe the second coldest game in NFL history. And there were so many cases of hypothermia, frostbite, and I think somebody actually passed away from the hypothermia afterwards. And I remember coming in here that next Monday or whatever it was saying the NFL will never play a game in those conditions again. It's football weather. We love it. But the danger of that kind of cold, I don't see the NFL ever playing a game at 6 below. Now, that's not what it's going to be in Chicago. It's going to be, somewhere between 10 and 14 degrees, probably 14, somewhere around there, dropping to 10. But it's not going to be below zero. Wind chill it will be. So I'm not suggesting that they are going to consider moving that game. They won't. But I'm telling you, the next time we get a game with below zero temperatures, they're gonna move that game. They're not going to risk fans' health again. This will all be solved in about 15 years when there will be like 3 outdoor stadiums left.
The Bears are playing in Gary, Indiana?
Yeah, near South Bend. But what we've had so far is we've had 6 playoff games, all outdoors. We've got 4 more this weekend, all outdoors. By the way, all in colder weather cities. Now, Denver's supposed to be lovely. The East has kind of had the cold mostly this winter. Denver hasn't. I saw something, and I don't know if I mentioned it. Did you know that Denver this year for their home games essentially set a weather record by not playing in any game under the temperature of 45 degrees. It was 45 or warmer for every single Denver home game, and it's supposed to be in the mid to upper 40s on Saturday with sunshine. Seattle's not supposed to be rainy. It's supposed to be clear and in the 40s. New England will be cold, and Chicago will be cold. And then the domed possibilities would be the Rams, if they were to win and they were to face the 49ers, that would be at SoFi. So that could be a possibility. And then the Texans, if they win and the Bills win, the AFC title game would be in Houston. It would be a 5 seed versus a 6 seed. I'm sure Buffalo would take that right now, but I'll tell you what, they do not match up well with Houston at all. Do you ever, at this point when our team is out of it, which is almost always, except for last year, do you have a rooting interest this weekend, Max? Because I do.
I'm going to be rooting for my Houston ticket. That's for damn sure. But I don't know, man. I do want to see the Bills kind of advance a little bit further. I just don't believe in Bo Nix. I'm a big fan of my agendas. So I am going to be rooting for Josh Allen.
What's your agenda on Bo Nix again? You don't like Bo Nix, right?
I just don't think
you're not a believer in Denver.
No, I'm not a believer in Bo. It's just he does the CJ Stroud thing where he gets a little worked up when things get tight and then makes a bad play. Now, it's really funny that I put my money behind CJ Stroud and not Bo Nix, but that's a story for another day. But, yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, Houston right now, I'm rooting for me to be right and to cash on Houston. But in terms of a player, I'm really rooting for Josh Allen.
Mm-hmm.
Like if Josh Allen ends up in the Bills beat Denver and let's just say the Patriots win on Sunday, I will be a huge Buffalo fan and a huge Josh Allen fan if it's an AFC title game, Buffalo at New England, which, by the way, I think is a decent shot.
Decent shot, yeah.
I think Houston certainly can win. I think this is a different matchup for them. The NFL, man, the reason it's week to week and always has been is twofold. 1, health. 2, it's a league of matchups. Just because a team looks terrible one week against one team, it doesn't mean they're going to look the same the following week. As NFL fans, I would hope that's something we've been able to, digest and understand over the years is it changes week to week. Sometimes you get a team that's just so overwhelmingly talented and dominant. Philadelphia's defense last year was obvious. I think to a certain degree, Seattle and Houston's defenses are pretty obviously great, and matchups aside, they're going to be pretty good. But for the most part, it's a game of health and matchups and quarterback, of course. Quarterback. And the best quarterback in the remaining 8 is easily Josh Allen, followed by Matt Stafford. And then we can count a few spots until we get to the next one. You've got 2 elite quarterbacks in the final 8, Josh Allen and Matt Stafford. Look, Drake May might end up becoming elite. Maybe he'll prove that over the next few weeks. Caleb Williams has that opportunity as well, although I think Drake May's, path to elite is a little bit shorter than Caleb's. I think he's just more polished all around. Bo Nix isn't there. Sam Darnold's not there. To a certain degree, I do have great belief in Brock Purdy. I think Brock Purdy's legit, and I think it's more than just being a system quarterback. I think the system is perfect for him, but he's a badass competitor, and he's really, really good off schedule. He's really good at creating. CJ Stroud's not elite, although I think he's talented. Yeah, those are the quarterbacks. Did I miss any? No. Ranking the quarterbacks right now, it would be Allen 1, Stafford 2. Who's 3?
Ooh.
Are you ready to put Drake May
I might
there?
be right now.
I think
his season?
I am.
Yeah,
right
I think
now,
it's May. Yeah.
Right now? Yeah. Stafford, Allen, Stafford, May. Yeah, I if you gave me the choice right now of moving forward, but forget that, playing on Sunday with Bo Nix, Brock Purdy, Sam Darnold, CJ Stroud, Drake May, or Caleb Williams, I think I would take Drake May. I think I would. Is that nuts?
We were doing this with Jaden Daniels last year, weren't we?
Of course. But the NFC also was really void. Stafford was in the Final Four, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so was Jared Goff, and so was Jalen Hurts. But in the postseason last year, it was very obvious that Jaden was the best quarterback in the NFC playoffs. Easily the best player in the way he played against Tampa and Detroit, and even Philly for that matter. He was the best player in the postseason in the NFC. If if Bond or if Zach Bond or Jalen Carter weren't, but offensively, he and Saquon Barkley, right? I guess you throw Barkley into the mix,
of course.
Yeah. Through one round of the playoffs, nobody played better this weekend than Josh Allen. Nobody did. Although the Texans' front four played pretty well. God, that was destruction. When we come back, we'll talk a little Mike Tomlin with our guest, Nick Farabaugh. That's actually going to be about 15 minutes from now. I do want to play for you when we come back some of Steve Bisciotti, the Ravens owner, the press conference he held yesterday to talk about John Harbaugh not being the coach anymore. That's next. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the Team980.com.
Tyler Luke from 44. Snap good. Hold it. The kick is no good. It is wide right. And the Steelers are the champions of the North.
If Tyler Luke makes that field goal, is John Harbaugh still here coaching this team?
For a week.
For a week. Okay.
That was Steve Bisciotti answering that question yesterday. He's the owner of the Ravens. He sat up there for an hour with GM Eric DeCosta and took questions a few days after parting ways with longtime head coach John Harbaugh. People raving about this press conference. I've heard some of the quotes from it. I've always been a Bisciotti fan. I did not know until yesterday that Steve Bisciotti had not spoken to reporters in nearly 4 years, since 2022, had not held a press conference at their actual facility since 2018. He said, don't take it personally. I just kind of bailed because I'll talk to you guys when we don't make the playoffs, but we were making the playoffs, and I just thought that the guys that got us to the playoffs were the ones you should be talking to. He also said that, he stopped doing press conferences because, like Seinfeld, I ran out of good material. He was funny. He was direct. He was super honest. From what I've heard from it, that was a professional press conference, start to finish. Our owner, his team did not make the postseason this year. He has not talked yet, has he? Is there a scheduled Josh Harris press conference? I don't know if there is or isn't. Do you know if there is?
No, not that. If there is one, I don't know about it.
It was pretty easy to talk last year after the season was over. That was an easy opportunity to meet with the press. And remember, part of that press conference was to tell everybody that the name was staying because people inside that building had really become attached to it, which I think was the wrong thing to say. And I think that was a big dud during that press conference. Everything else was great. I wonder if he will speak after this season. I do, and I remember during the days in which we were talking about, who would own the team, who would buy the team from Dan. And I had like a list of 10 things that I wanted in my new owner. And one of the things that I wanted is I didn't want to hear from my owner except once before the season, and then the next time, accepting the Lombardi Trophy. And that's all I needed, once before the season, state of the franchise, and then that's it. And I know that certain reporters and certain journalists and columnists, et cetera, would prefer that the owner be more transparent. I don't want my owner involved in the day-to-day. I want the people involved in running the football operation to be the front-facing people. Ironically, that feels like a shot at Dan Snyder, and it really isn't, because Dan Snyder was a recluse. I mean, he was legitimately, angst-ridden over press conferences or media appearances, which is why we got them so seldomly. Happy New Year or Happy Thanksgiving, on New Year's Day or the day after New Year's when he hired Ron Rivera. He just was not cut out for that, and he knew it, and he had a ton of anxiety around it, and that's why he essentially was a recluse publicly for the last 7-8 years of his ownership. That's not the case with Steve Bisciotti. He's just a first-rate owner that would rather his football decision makers be the front-facing people of the organization. He was asked another question just about the job opening, and he said the following when it was suggested that now Mike Tomlin is available.
He did? Is it official?
That's what I keep hearing. So is he a candidate here?
Holy Mike, wouldn't that be awesome? Only if John takes the Pittsburgh job. Wow, wouldn't that be interesting? I don't know, that thing last week maybe disqualified him for my opening. after our kicker missed a kick to let them advance. Good for Mike. Yeah, I don't know. Talk to him. I love Mike. I mean, I've admired Mike for 18 years, and that's really shocking that he did it that way. But yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Man, two organizations that are basically buttoned up top down and have been for a long period of time, now without their coaches after 18 and 19 years, respectively. Mike Tomlin gone after 19 years without a losing season. John Harbaugh in Baltimore, this rivalry, which really reached one of those new chapters with the season finale and the missed kick by Tyler Loop at the end, in an incredible game for the last spot in the postseason. It'll feel differently moving forward. I would say this, the Baltimore job just flat out right now is a better job. I mean, you have Lamar Jackson. Pittsburgh doesn't have a quarterback. Aaron Rodgers isn't coming back without Mike Tomlin there for age 43. Baltimore's a better job, but man, these two organizations and the ownership of these organizations, it's a tried and true for the most part. It starts at the top. You know, I saw Ben tweet out yesterday, standing, that 45 years ago yesterday, Joe Gibbs was named head coach of the Washington Redskins. So January 13th, 1981. And that ownership was buttoned up top down. It was first rate with Jack Kent Cooke and Bobby Beathard as the general manager. Bobby Beathard made the decision. Jack Kent Cooke had never heard of Joe Gibbs, didn't care who Joe Gibbs was, just had to be sold by the GM. He did it. He hired Gibbs. And for, that era, which is now a long time ago, I get it, 45 years ago yesterday it started. And really it didn't start then, because the 10 years previous were very productive years, and it was a good organization, and it was a winning organization for the most part when George Allen came here in 1971. But man, for that era, it was, now it's the Ravens and the Steelers. Back then, it was the Redskins. You'd throw in maybe the 49ers. Those were the class organizations in the league, and they did it right. Steve Bisciotti's one hell of an owner, and he talked very candidly about why he moved on from John Harbaugh, and said it was one of the hardest things he's ever done. But one of the things he said is, once I realized that I wouldn't regret it, I knew the decision was made. Obviously, with any decision, you think, am I going to regret this? Well, if you think for a moment, even a second, no, I'm not going to regret it, there's your answer. A little bit later on at 11 o'clock, we're going to play something for you that Peter Schrager from ESPN said about the Cliff Kingsbury Washington Commanders breakup last week. You'll hear that. But up next, we'll go to Pittsburgh and find out how they're dealing with what is an incredible change after 19 years in the organization. Mike Tomlin done. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com.
After months of rumors, weeks of rumors, Mike Tomlin at 2 p.m. yesterday Eastern walked into a team meeting and informed his players what he had informed owner Art Rooney just minutes before, that he was stepping down as Steelers coach, officially an end of an era, a really dramatic end for Mike Tomlin, who, of course, has been under fire this year for struggling toward the end of the season, then ended up with an over 500 record, as he always does, 10-7, made the playoffs. Another playoff loss led to him walking off the field Monday night against the Houston Texans to chance to fire Tomlin, and he just wondered, when would enough be enough? When would the guy who gave everything to the Steelers, who returned them or kept them at respectability, really one of the more respected coaches around and one of the best franchises around, when would Mike Tomlin say that it is it? That time was yesterday. There have been murmurs really for a long time. We've talked about it plenty, that Mike Tomlin would step away and then do television. My understanding is that is firmly in his sights. Nothing firm and final yet, but certainly that is a possibility. I know several networks have offers out to him in anticipation of this. But for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the most important thing, Tomlin is now out, and they need a new head coach.
Ian Rappaport yesterday. We are hopefully going to be joined by Nick Farabaugh. He covers the Steelers for PennLive.com. Mike Tomlin's Pittsburgh coaching career is over after 19 seasons, a 193-114-2 record, 13 playoff appearances, eight AFC North titles, a Super Bowl win, a Super Bowl loss, and another AFC Championship game appearance where they lost to the Patriots in 2016. That was the last year they won a playoff game, was 2016. So a couple of things as we hopefully get our guy on from Pittsburgh to talk about this. We said this about the Harbaugh situation, and I comped it to the Andy Reid situation in Philadelphia. It runs its course after a while, especially when you're not winning championships. Hell, it kind of ran its course with Belichick, and he had all of those Super Bowls in New England. But when you're not winning, it's what have you done for me lately? And winning is defined in places like Pittsburgh, not a winning record and a playoff berth, but winning in the postseason and getting to a Super Bowl and winning it all. Baltimore has those same standards. I think most of us, for the era that we lived through in great pain, would have taken a winning season every year in the playoffs, 13 out of 19 seasons with 8 division titles. Even if it meant 6 or 7 years without winning a playoff game, we would have still enjoyed the excitement of gearing up for a playoff game and having seasons in which, they went 12-4 and 10-7 and 10. Their last 3 seasons, 10 wins each of the last 3 seasons, but couldn't get it done. And look, what happened with Pittsburgh is no coincidence. I don't think it's on the coach. They didn't have a quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger was healthy and playing at an elite level. When they had that, they were winning playoff games. Once he got hurt and as his career wound down, they couldn't do it anymore with respect to winning these playoff games. Now, we see lesser teams, rise up more out of less in a postseason, make a run or win a game that they shouldn't have won. There was no winning that game on Monday night. The combination of Lombardi and Elway wasn't going to win that game. They were not going to win that game against that Houston defense. Last year, playing Baltimore on the road in that AFC wildcard round game, tough matchup. The year before that was against Buffalo, on the road. They had some very tough matchups in, losing the 7 straight that they lost going back to the end of 2016 when they lost the AFC title game to New England. But what a career, man. What a leader. What a culture. He came into a great culture, and it'll be interesting to see what direction Pittsburgh goes in because they've had 3 coaches since 1968. Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and Mike Tomlin. And all 3 of them were not necessarily virtual no names, but for the most part, not top of mind for anybody. Cowher was 34 years old. Tomlin was 34 years old. Noel was 38 when they hired him. So they've got this, the Rooney family has this direction in which they like to turn every, 20 years. Now, Cowher's career was not as long as Tomlin's, nor was it as long as Noel's. But it's typically somebody in their early 30s that can be around for 20 years and coach at a high level. So we'll see what direction Pittsburgh goes. But it is kind of interesting, right, that Pittsburgh is in the market for hiring a coach for the first time in 19 years. And while it's not the most attractive job of the 9 out there, it's not. I mean, Baltimore, I think, is super attractive because of Lamar. I think Atlanta's roster makes that job attractive. I think the Giants roster and maybe even the quarterback, I'm not necessarily a huge Jackson Dart believer, but the thing about the Pittsburgh job for anybody looking to get into it is there's a pretty good chance you're going to be there for a while based on track record. They don't bail on coaches quickly. I saw somebody on Twitter in my timeline, and I'm looking for it. I was looking for it during the break, and I can't find it. But it's somebody that tweets me a lot, big fan of the team, said, would you get rid of – we had this conversation last week. Would you get rid of Dan Quinn right now for Mike Tomlin? Would you get rid of Dan Quinn right now for John Harbaugh? Those are two coaches that are not going to take the Washington job and work for an owner who fired a coach after 2 seasons, one of which was 14 wins and an NFC championship appearance. These are higher quality people. They're looking for stability. They're looking for an ownership situation that is stable and not impulsive. If Josh Harris were to fire Dan Quinn to try to hire a Harbaugh or a Tomlin, if he were to fire Quinn, if he had fired Quinn, he would look like incredibly impulsive and not very attractive to the high-quality candidates out there. He'd look fine to the guys that are looking for their first opportunity, but not for the guys that have a choice. That was the problem here for 24 years, is that anybody that had a choice wasn't coming here. You don't want that situation anymore. We've talked about what it would look like to the rest of the league if he fired Quinn and moved on from the head coach after a year, which was completely justifiable by anybody that's reasonable in the NFL because of the injuries that they had this year. You just would look like the old franchise. That'd be a big risk to take. Now, if you thought there was a young and up-and-comer that absolutely was a guy that you could see here for the next 15 years, and for whatever reason you turned on Quinn, you might have a chance to get that guy. But you're not getting anybody of high quality or anybody with a big-time choice if you're firing your head coach after 2 years, one of those years being the best season in 33 for this franchise. Can't do that. Anyway, Tomlin, surefire Hall of Famer. So I guess we're not getting our guest, Max.
Yeah,
he's not available.
Unavailable at the moment.
Okay, no worries. So here's the deal with Tomlin. He's got 2 years left on his contract, and they're not going to let him out of the contract to go take another job without compensation. I don't know if he wants to coach now. Anyway, Tomlin and Harbaugh would certainly be at the top of anybody's list with an opening. Not Baltimore's list, obviously not Pittsburgh's list for Tomlin, and same thing for Harbaugh. I don't think Harbaugh is on the Pittsburgh list. That would be pretty interesting. That wouldn't exactly be Norv Turner to Washington. But can you imagine Harbaugh going to Pittsburgh? But that's not going to happen. But as far as the situation, he's going to be sought after by everybody in television. I mean, Mike Tomlin is a professional motivator, a professional communicator. This guy's going to have plenty of opportunities to make a lot of money in whatever he wants to do. And he can take a year off or 2 years off and then come back to coaching if he wants. He's 54 years old. So he's got some time left if he wants to coach again, but would be really interesting to see him on TV. Now, in some ways, I wonder, he is a man at times of a few words. They're powerful words typically as a communicator, but they're not going to let him go coach without compensation. It'll be the Sean Payton situation, with Denver, where New Orleans got compensation. So if the Raiders want Mike Tomlin to come in and coach with Fernando Mendoza as the number 1 pick, they're going to have to give up compensation. They wouldn't have to give up number 1 overall, but they'd have to give up compensation to Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh job, you don't have a quarterback. You got an offensive line that's okay. You got age on defense, Hayward, Watt, etc. They overachieved this year, as they seem to do every year during Tomlin's reign, or certainly over the last 7 years. I think that's the mark of an outstanding coach, when you don't have the horses and yet you're winning more games than you are losing. It wasn't good enough. It grew old losing in the first round of the postseason 6 times in the last 9 years. I get that if you're a Steelers fan. And I totally understand even the Ravens mindset, the fan mindset at this point. But grass isn't always greener on the other side, and Pittsburgh's really going to have to start over from scratch. They just don't have the quarterback, and they don't have a lot of the answers in various spots. And that new coach may not overachieve like Tomlin did. So they'll have to be patient, but that seems to be the organization that is patient. So I wanted to play something for you that Peter Schrager from ESPN said yesterday about the Kingsbury breakup with the organization. Here it was.
For Cliff in Washington, at the end of the day, they wanted to make a change, and he was more than fine to no longer be the offensive play caller in that building anymore. And he loves Jaden, and he loves Dan Quinn. I think it was just time. And they're moving on to David Blau, who's a 30-year-old, and they get their fresh new start, and excited to see where that goes. It actually ended on good terms with him and Quinn. Cliff goes on now.
If they don't like each other, Shakes. Why they parting? They don't like his system, his scheme. What, they want him to run something that he doesn't want to run?
I think that was it. I think they're looking to get more into a different scheme and really mirror what they did in San Francisco, and in some of that stuff that Adam Peters brought over there. And I think that's fair. What Cliff does is different. It's not what they want to run, so they're going to move on. And again, both sides are cool with each other, happy, and Cliff's going to get an opportunity.
So that's the first time I've actually listened to it. I've read the quote from Schrager. I mentioned last week, Ben was on with me last week, said the same thing, that we weren't hearing that there was great angst or great confrontational tone or any sort of, ill will towards each other. That's not the state that the relationship had reached. Now, Diana's report, remember, was that there was a disconnect specifically with Adam Peters. A disconnect doesn't mean that they dislike each other, that they're not being professional towards each other, which is what I've heard all along, that it never reached the point where, it was ugly between the two. I think overall, even though he doesn't mention, Peters, other than to say Peters' familiarity with the San Francisco scheme, Quinn wanting to go to a different scheme, I think ultimately that's what it was, is that Quinn in particular, and probably in his collaborative relationship with Adam Peters, just wanted to go in a different direction from a scheme standpoint. And that's what they're doing. But Kingsbury, for sure, I think was probably looking also for his next opportunity. I don't know if he'll get a head coaching job. I would guess that ultimately he'll be a coordinator this year. I think maybe that's really what he is, maybe more than a head coach at the pro level anyway. And there are going to be some opportunities, whether it's working with a Fernando Mendoza in Vegas. Let's just say if Brian Flores got the head coaching job there, or Jesse Minter got the head coaching job there, or he interviewed in Baltimore for the head coaching job. I do think that Baltimore's, and I think I read this earlier this morning, Baltimore's interviewing a lot of people, but it's not necessarily head coaching interviews. It's let's figure it out. Are you a head coach, or maybe you're our offensive coordinator for Lamar? That would be an interesting fit. Mike McDaniel's out there, and the Philadelphia situation. They fired Kevin Patullo yesterday. But I don't think that this was a situation, not that Diana reported this, because she really didn't. But those that sort of took it as, wow, it fell apart. The relationships aren't there. They don't like each other. They got to get rid of. I don't think it ever got to that point. I think it just was very professional, and it was the head coach first, probably with the general manager agreeing that they wanted to part ways to go with a different scheme. We know that Jaden and Marcus love Cliff Kingsbury. That quarterback room loved Kingsbury. But that's part of the reason that Blau is being elevated, is there's a familiarity with David Blau among the quarterbacks, specifically Jaden Daniels. So there was this report yesterday, which we need to get into, from Ian Rappaport, quote, the Commanders are hoping to interview Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores for their vacant defensive coordinator job, sources said. Flores' contract is up in Minnesota, so he's able to look at other similar jobs. He'd be number one for me. Now, I don't think it'll happen. I think he stays in Minnesota if he doesn't get a chance to be a head coach, which there's a lot of, problems there with the lawsuit that still exists against the league and Brian Flores. But if Brian Flores were looking to leave Minnesota for whatever reason, and he's got a pretty good situation there as the defensive coordinator. He runs the defense. Kevin O'Connell runs the offense. He's got tremendous autonomy. They've got some talent defensively, and he has schemed that defense up for 2 years. I mean, that defense has played at a high level for 2 years and was playing at a very high level at the end of this year in particular. They didn't have a quarterback this year, and they may not have a quarterback moving forward, which may be a reason that Brian Flores would look to move, to a Washington where there is an answer at quarterback, or somewhere else where he can win big if he schemes up a defense. But that would be my number one. Brian Flores would be my number one without question if he were legitimately available and legitimately interested. They requested the other day to talk to Jonathan Gannon. I think Gannon would be an outstanding defensive coordinator here as well. Flores would be my number one. But that's not going to solve everything. More on that next. Ian Rappaport suggesting yesterday that Washington is hoping to interview Brian Flores for their vacant defensive coordinator job. Brian Flores would be number one on my list of all of the defensive coordinators out there. He's not a silver bullet answer. They have no talent defensively. They have to get players. They've got to add players that can make plays. I would certainly love to see Dorrance Armstrong come off of that injury, come back from that injury, and be the player that he was prior to the injury. But Dorrance Armstrong is a good player. He's not a scare the other team player. They desperately have to be looking at adding a lot to that defense. It needs a minimum of 4 to 5 new starters. I mean, some of you would say 11. I'm talking about what's realistic in one off season. They've got to find 4 to 5 new starters in free agency. Not necessarily going to happen in the draft unless it's your first round pick, because you don't typically get players to come in and contribute right away as second, third, or fourth rounders. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you do. That first round pick, if it's a defensive player, needs to be the right one. That's for sure. They've got to add some defensive talent. They have the wherewithal with their cap space, but a defensive coordinator can certainly coach it up, which it has not been coached up the last 2 years without enough talent. But ultimately, he needs players. I mean, he needs, some of the players that even, they had in Minnesota this year. I mean, we saw some of those players in that 31-0 blowout loss. We saw what Andrew Van Ginkel looks like. We saw what Isaiah Rodgers and Pace and Murphy Jr. look like. What Jonathan Greenard, Grenard looked like as a pass rusher who was basically timing up every snap count. Harrison Smith is retiring, it looks like, after this year. You got to give him some talent and probably some higher IQ talent because they had that on their defense as well. But Brian Flores is an interesting situation. Brian Flores didn't play in the NFL. Brian Flores barely played, football at all. He played at Boston College, but wasn't like a great player. He was injured and caught on at the age of 23 years old as a scouting assistant for Bill Belichick in New England. And from there, he worked his way up to, linebackers coach, and then got the head coaching job in Miami in 2019 and was there for those 3 seasons. And then, it came to a crashing halt with him getting fired and him filing a class action lawsuit against the NFL, alleging racial discrimination. That suit still exists out there. But Brian Flores can coach defense, and he took over the Pittsburgh defense in 2022 and then the Viking defense in 2023 for the last 3 seasons. Look, they were not a very good team. Minnesota wasn't this year, but it wasn't because of their defense. Their offense led the league in turnovers by far, with 30 on the season. They just kept giving the ball back to the other team over and over again. And that's really why, at the quarterback position in particular, with J.J. McCarthy and some of the others, they just couldn't get it done. Not this year anyway, with McCarthy at that position. But he's been an excellent defensive coordinator, along with Vic Fangio, one of those defensive coordinators that you hear about all of the time from other head coaches, offensive coordinators, about how difficult they are to prepare for. And that is, I'm sure why Washington would love to get Brian Flores. I think some of the reporting out there on Flores has been that he will likely stay with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. But that's a situation where, do they have the answer at quarterback? Kevin O'Connell could be on the hot seat this year, believe it or not, after the season they just had. And the quarterback, conundrum that they have is J.J. McCarthy the right guy or not? Can he stay healthy long enough to even have an opportunity to be the right guy. So Flores could be looking for a situation in which he can take over a defense that needs help, that needs elevating to support an already existing, offense that can do it. Washington would be viewed that way by a Brian Flores, I would imagine. Hey, keep your quarterback upright and we got a shot, and then I can get the ball back for you a few times during the season. That would be my number one. Flores would be my number one. Now, there's one sort of cautionary tale out there about Brian Flores, and it has nothing to do with the lawsuit. Ryan Fitzpatrick played for Brian Flores when he was the head coach in Miami. And last year, he went kind of scorched earth. It was at the end of the season, went scorched earth a bit on Brian Flores. He said, and I'll read you the quote. He said, I think the interesting thing with Brian Flores, when I think about him and being able to play under him for a few years, is which version of Brian Flores are we getting? In year one with Miami, halfway through the year, we hadn't won a game, and yet there was a shift in the way he was approaching the job. He was likable. He was relatable. He demanded a lot out of the players, but he was also able to get the best version of his players. But as his tenure went on in Miami, he kind of became unrecognizable. A lot of the staff he brought over from New England, that was where, he cut his teeth in the NFL. He was there for 15 plus years as an assistant. But I think he's going to have a really hard time if you're interviewing him for a head coach. I think in the interviews, he'll be likable, he'll be relatable. But when people say, okay, give me somebody from Miami that coached under you as a reference so we can talk to them, I think he burned a lot of bridges there. Instead of having the humility to ask questions, to collaborate, I think by the end of his time there, he became a dictator. He ruined a lot of those relationships, closed quote. So, that's one person's opinion of how the Brian Flores Miami situation ended. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I don't think has an axe to grind. I don't know why he would, make it up. But it's also important to acknowledge that people can change. People can learn from those experiences. But it may be what keeps him, along with the NFL lawsuit, it may be what keeps him from getting a head coaching job, even though there are 9 of them out there, and keeps him in the mix to be a defensive coordinator somewhere next year in the NFL. I think he'll be back in Minnesota. I would love it if he considered Washington, because I feel like that's what this team needs. They need a coordinator that can get more out of less, because no matter what you do next year in terms of how many players you add, and it needs an overhaul, coordinator and talent. It needs a complete overhaul. And you're not going to have enough talent next year in the overhaul to be a great defense, more likely than not. I mean, defense changes. It's variable year to year, understood. But it was so bad this year that the idea would be to get to the middle of the pack defensively and have a great offensive team next year if you're going to do some damage. Win a lot of games, get back to the postseason, be a threat when you get to the postseason. Brian Flores is a guy that's gotten more out of less throughout his career, including in Miami. That defense was nasty for a few of those years. So I'm all in on Brian Flores, potentially being a defensive coordinator somewhere other than Minnesota, and that place being here. That would be an awesome situation. What do you think? 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. We've talked a lot about Blau and Kingsbury and the offense over the last week. They've got to hire a defensive coordinator. That's coming, and I think it's coming soon. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we have that news this week, next week at the latest. Where do you want him to go? I want Brian Flores here if he's available, legitimately. Quinn is a likable coach. Coaches like being on staffs with Dan Quinn. Does Brian Flores have any ties to Dan Quinn? No, none that I know of. I mean, New England his entire time, Miami as a head coach, Pittsburgh as a defensive, senior defensive head coach, and then Minnesota as the defensive coordinator. But give me Brian Flores, and then let's go get some players, and let's try to have a defense that can compete at an NFL level, because that was not an NFL defense this year. 301-230-0980, 301-230-0980. Who do you want the team to hire as a defensive coordinator? Gannon's out there. Brian Flores is out there. And then, of course, the Quinn family guys. Raheem Morris, who's looking for a head coaching job. A guy like Jeff Ulbrich, who Atlanta's not letting anybody interview quite yet. They're going to hire their head coach and then see if the head coach wants to keep Ulbrich. Al Harris, the DB's coach in Chicago. We've talked about those three going back to the moment that Quinn took over for Joe Witt Jr. Who do you want them to hire as the defensive coordinator? 301-230-0980. I want to mention real quickly that Window Nation's offering a very good deal right now. If your house has been uncomfortably cold this winter and your heating bills are shockingly expensive this year, you need new windows more likely than not. And we know that you don't want to pay a fortune for them. That's why January is the time to act with Window Nation. They've got a buy four, get four free sale going on right now. But beyond that, if you choose to finance the purchase, you don't have to pay anything for your new windows for 2 years. No money down, no monthly payments, and no interest for 2 years. So you'll get the windows, buy four, get four free, which essentially adds up to half price on the windows, and you don't have to pay for them until the year 2028. Replace your older windows with custom-built, high-quality windows from Window Nation. They measure those windows to ensure your windows fit perfectly year-round. They offer a lifetime warranty on those windows, so there's no risk. Get your windows, protect your home, beautify your home, and you can choose from over 1,500 styles and colors. Window Nation, right now, 866-90-NATION, or go to windownation.com to get started. Getting started means a free in-home estimate that'll take an hour or less. windownation.com or 866-90-NATION. There are now 9 head coaching opportunities after Tomlin departed from Pittsburgh yesterday. And there are going to be some names out there, Mike McDaniel, Cliff Kingsbury, Brian Flores, and others that may not land one of those 9 jobs, but will end up being out there for a coordinator hire. I do think that the Mike McDaniel saga will be an interesting one. From our standpoint, I think following the Cliff situation will be interesting to see if he lands somewhere as a head coach. I think the chances are probably less than 50-50 on that. But where would he then land as an OC? And then for defensive coordinators, teams that are looking for those, our team leading the pack in dire need of a major upgrade from a defensive coordinator standpoint. There are guys out there. Raheem Morris is a defensive head coach. Ties to Quinn, we know that. He's looking for a head coaching job. He might get one. Who knows? If not, does he want to coach at all? Does he want to be a defensive coordinator after being a head coach for the last 2 seasons? Certainly, he and Dan Quinn have a very close relationship. He was part of Dan Quinn's staff in Atlanta. But Raheem Morris was the defensive coordinator on the Super Bowl champion LA Rams staff in 2021 with Sean McVay, and Chris Shula is being bandied about as a potential head coaching possibility in this carousel. Would he choose LA over Washington? Who knows? Jeff Ulbrich has a lot of ties to Quinn. Al Harris has a lot of ties to Quinn. Jonathan Gannon is now in the market to be a defensive coordinator. There was a report the other day that Washington was interested in interviewing Jonathan Gannon. They've already interviewed Patrick Graham and Joe Cullen. But Brian Flores' name yesterday tied to our franchise. Ian Rappaport, the Commanders are hoping to interview Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores for their vacant defensive coordinator job. That, to me, is the home run. Blau is the bold move. Flores is the absolute, in the moment, home run hire. He's got to have more players, got to have more talent, no doubt. But at least we wouldn't go into a season potentially at a, coaching disadvantage, their offense against our defense. Brian Flores has consistently been, as a defensive coordinator or even as a defensive head coach, one of the guys that when you hear the team that's getting ready to play his team, they say he's one of the toughest guys to figure out. I think Vic Fangio probably leads the league in rave reviews leading into a game from other offensive head coaches or other offensive coordinators saying this is the one that's really difficult. But Brian Flores is probably in that top 2 or 3. So that would be my number one. That would be an exciting hire. Very exciting hire for a coordinator hire. 301-230-0980. Let's go to Bobby in North Carolina. Bobby, who do you want them to hire as a defensive coordinator?
Hey, Kev. No-brainer. It's Flores. I mean, they ought to be able to go fly there right now and just sign a check. They ain't going to have to interview him. I mean, just go get him. I mean, he's the best out there to me. You're right. Fangio's good, but I love Brian Flores' defensive schemes, man. They're aggressive, and they cause turnovers, everything we've been talking about the last few years that we were lacking. So, and then 1A, I wouldn't be too disappointed if we ended up with Gannon for me, Kevin. I think he's got, he cut his teeth as a DC with the Eagles a few years ago before he got the head coaching job, and I think he would be a good hire too. But you're right. If we could get Flores, that would definitely give us some optimism as far as being structurally what we're supposed to be doing. Granted, got to have about 5 or 6 more starters on that side of the ball, but Flores is definitely the home run. He's the grand slam. Gannon will be the home run hire. Okay,
yeah.
That's how I'm looking at it. So either one of those guys, I think, will be on the right track, hopefully fixing this defense finally.
Thank you, Bobby. Appreciate it. Brian Flores, just looking at defense wise. In his second year in Miami as a head coach, they were number one in the league in takeaways. Second year in Miami. By the way, I think Van Ginkel was on that team. And then Van Ginkel ended up joining him in Minnesota. In the 6 years where he's been either a head coach or defensive coordinator, his teams have led the league in takeaways twice. Last year in Minnesota, and then that second year in Miami. They were 8th in 2021. They were this year in takeaways 10th in Minnesota. Their problem in Minnesota is that they led the league in giveaways with 30. They turned the ball over too much. But yards-wise, the traditional number, Minnesota's defense finished. Listen to this, and I didn't even realize this until I looked at it during the break. Minnesota's defense finished this year 3rd overall defensively in the league. Per DVOA, I'm pulling that up right now. Defensively, they ranked 3rd in the NFL defensively this year. And it's the only reason Minnesota was even halfway competitive and their season didn't crater, because their offense was terrible this year. Let's go to Kevin in Arlington. Kevin, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, thank you for taking my call.
Sure, Kev.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Flores, when you consider 3rd overall and consider the talent depth discrepancy between what Flores had to work with and what Vic Fangio has to work with.
Exactly.
I go back to your show opening that I love, Kev. If that front ain't in gangsta, well, guess what? We haven't been with an unbelievable assortment of defensive line talents. I'm including Jonathan Allen and Montez Sweat in that, and they're gone. I want, whether it's Flores or my number 2 guy I'm interested in is Joe Cullen, given Spags' influence, and he's a D-line coach.
Yeah.
We have got to change that more than anything else. You could say the secondary and its communications issues and its performance are maybe just as bad. I don't know. To me, we've got some talented players, whether we move on from Payne or not, on that D-line. We're going to need to get an edge rusher, hopefully David Bailey from Texas Tech with the 7th pick. We have got to get our front in gangsta. And I don't really see that so much with the Quinn tree possibilities. Maybe Jonathan Gannon, excuse me. But and then I just want to say one more thing, but do you want to respond to what I just said? I mean, what do you think about that point of view?
Well, you have to have players, and you got to have players up front. I mean, you talked about the talent. Remember, there was that moment, and you're referring to it, where it's like, Chase Young, Montez Sweat, John Allen, Deron Payne were set for years to come. Now, I will say this. The 2022 defense, which Jack Del Rio coached, was a very good defensive football team that season. They were healthy and they were good. And they were the reason that the team was sitting in the 6th spot or 5 spot into December in the postseason race and had a chance that year. But other than that, yeah, it's been an absolute disaster, and they've got to improve up front, no doubt. And I don't think Deron Payne will be back. I just don't think he's worth $28 million in a cap hit for one season. And I'm a Deron Payne fan. But I don't think he's worth that. And so I think that, Dorrance Armstrong coming back, I don't even know when he would be able to come back based on the injury. Would he be ready for the beginning of the season? They need so much, but it starts there, no doubt. But at least with a really good coordinator, I kind of feel like what we saw in those first 8-9 games, which were disaster communication-wise, they just looked like the 3 Stooges or the 11 Stooges out there. They didn't know what they were doing. One hand couldn't find, their backside more than the other could, and it was a disaster. We've got to have competent coordinating and play calling and scheming and preparation, for each of these games. We've seen defenses overperform with lesser. We didn't see that with our group.
I agree. Just the last couple points. So you've still got Johnny Newton potentially. You've got Armstrong hopefully coming back. You've got Kinlaw moving on from Payne, I agree that's probably happening, but no doubt. I mean, what did Adam Peters say in the end of the season presser? We need to improve the pass rush. I'll be stunned if the 7th overall pick isn't for one of those defensive edge players. Now, just one last thing, and it's an aside, maybe it's a future call segment, but given the Schrader comments and given, I've heard David Aldridge, I've heard Ben, I've heard you. Here's a question to ponder. Sure, philosophical differences emerged, obviously, between Peters and Quinn and Kingsbury. Aldridge seemed to imply in his interview with Grant and Danny that Cliff really wasn't wanting to compromise on what it was he does offensively, and so they mutually parted ways. Here's my question. Was there concern about Jaden getting injured again, running Cliff's scheme, and that's why they shut him down? I mean, don't you think there's something to that? I think Aldridge couldn't have been more clear about this guy.
Well, they took some of the scheme away in the Minnesota game. They wouldn't let him run designed runs or zone reads.
Yeah. Well,
so they could have continued that way. No, I don't. I think it has to do much more with just the overall offensive approach. I think the number one thing, and I'm saving this for next hour, but there's one thing. It's very hard to predict what David Blau is going to be as an offensive coordinator, and anybody that tells you they're for sure about anything is reaching. This guy's been a position coach. He was the assistant quarterbacks coach before this year. We've all been hearing he's the next great thing, but what is it that they want that Blau's going to give them that Kingsbury didn't? Well, there's one obvious thing, and I'll share it with you guys next hour, but there's one obvious thing, and I think that's what was missing from Kingsbury's offense. There just wasn't enough to nullify and reduce pass rush and to give time for some of their lesser, offensive skill position players to get open. So I think it's scheme 100%. It's certainly not personality. I don't think that's it. I mean, they loved Cliff in that building. They certainly loved him in the offensive side of the building. But I'm going to get to some of that next hour. Thanks, Kev. Appreciate it. Let's go to Mark in Largo. Mark, go ahead. Who do you want as a defensive coordinator?
It's Flores, because I think, to be fair, I think Flores is probably this generation's version of Greg Williams. I do have a question for you, Kevin. Did Flores and Adam Peters kind of cross paths in New England?
Yes.
At any point when Adam was up in New England?
Yes. Yep.
They did. Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
I mean, he's a super young coach at the time, but yes, their paths crossed.
And now let me ask you this. Kevin. Here's a better question. You just said you don't want to pay Deron Payne $28 million, which I agree with you on. Does this change your draft? Because you got a lot of money under the cap. You could actually get some free agent defensive ends if you trade back maybe to 11 or 12. Peter Woods would be there. He would be there. I mean, you can get a tackle to play alongside Javon Kinlaw. Would you do that?
I haven't spent enough time looking at it. I mean, right now at number 7, if David Bailey were there, I'd certainly consider a quick twitch edge guy that can really make a difference. The trade back thing is always the preference because the draft is such a crapshoot, even for the people that are in it. It's a 35% hit rate. And if you get to 40, it's massively successful. But there was one draft I'll never forget. They traded back and they passed on J.J. Watt and they took Ryan Kerrigan. Kerrigan was a good player. J.J. Watt was a Hall of Fame player. So, not every draft is filled with 32 first-round talents. And some drafts are only filled with about 6 or 7 absolute first-round gimmies. So you don't pass on a gimme for volume. But volume typically, I agree, is the way to go. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Let's go to Ian. Ian's on hold. Go ahead.
I agree with you and all the callers that Brian Flores would be a home run hire. I think the reason I would be excited about him is he has no connection to Quinn, and I think his defensive philosophy is antiquated. But as you alluded to, if I could jump in on the Blau thing, it's so odd to make Kingsbury and Joe Witt Jr. the scapegoats for this year while the architect of the team, Peters, is still here, the head coach is still here, and then you somehow upgrade the assistant.
Do you think
QB
they made
coach.
Cliff Kingsbury the scapegoat by moving on from him? Is that really your takeaway from that?
Yes.
Okay, it's not mine. We'll agree to disagree. There was nothing to scapegoat Cliff Kingsbury on. They just had a philosophical difference, and they want to go in a different direction. But that's not a scapegoat. That was actually, in many ways, Cliff was probably ready to go too, because he didn't want to, if Cliff had said, yeah, I'm going to marry some of this stuff that you want me to marry together and evolve a little bit or change a little bit, he'd still be here. In many ways, Ian, I think if Blau weren't on the staff, I think there's a chance Cliff would still be here. Cliff was not made a scapegoat for this season. It's an absurd take. Now, Joe Witt Jr., a scapegoat for how bad the defense was this year and last year? Yeah, I can buy that, but not Cliff being a scapegoat for the season. No.
So we can agree to disagree, but I find it odd that the assistant QB coach took 2 promotions up while being in the building. I just have an issue with the person who's the head coach saying he doesn't agree with the offensive philosophy as if he has no input on it. He's the head coach. I have an issue with that. And then the guy 2 layers down is somehow so bright that he at no point went to Kingsbury and said, hey, I think we should run more or we should do X more. It's
how do you
odd.
know how do you know he didn't?
How do you know he did?
I did. I don't. But you just said you find it surprising that David Blau didn't go to Cliff Kingsbury. How do you know he didn't?
I find it odd that you would promote somebody below somebody and then say, hey, the offense didn't fit my philosophy. Dan Quinn's the head coach. He at any point during the entire season could say, hey, can we change X, Y, and Z? Why didn't he do that?
That's really not the way it works. You don't change X, Y, and Z in the middle of the season. You change that in the off season, and you work on what you want the offense to be starting, in April and mini camps and OTAs and then training camp. You don't change a system in the middle of a season, especially a system that actually was, as I've said, and I believe very strongly in, was actually overachieving based on the players they had on the field. And you're not going to change a system in the middle of a season when you're playing your second and third string quarterbacks. That's just not practical.
So we can agree on that. Then why is he gone? If he did such a good job with Mariota,
because you
and
can
Johnson,
change the system in the off season, which is what he's going to do. He made up his mind that that's what he wants to do. You just don't do that in the regular season when you basically have a bunch of practice squad players out there. That would go over real well. Not only are we, changing our system midseason, we're going to do it with all these practice squad players that are playing for us. I got to roll. We got a guest coming up. Sorry, I didn't get to some of you, but the guy that was going to join us to talk about Tomlin's departure in Pittsburgh will join us next. Mike Tomlin, 19 years in Pittsburgh. Bill Cowher and Chuck Noll, 3 coaches since 68. Crazy. I don't know if it was shocking news. I think some expected it. Nick Farabaugh covers the Steelers for Penn Live. You can follow Nick on X on Twitter at Farabaugh FB. Before we get to Tomlin, I don't know how you guys felt as Steelers people watching Monday night, but I said earlier, I'm not sure Lombardi and Marino as a combination would have done much against Houston's defense on Monday night. What were the big takeaways after losing 30-6?
I think the big takeaway, Kevin, is just the actual talent differential between those two units. I mean, the Steelers offense versus the Steelers defense, I can't remember a unit mismatch we have seen bigger than that in a playoff game in quite some time. I'll just say that. Because, I mean, you just saw the speed, the physicality that the Texans had. It's star after star after star. And then you look at the Steelers offense, and sure, you have Rodgers. He's a star of the past. But Metcalf's more of a 2 than a 1. The offensive line's young and promising, but it's still young. Meanwhile, you have Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, who are full-fledged stars. That's what that's what I took away from that was the Steelers got thoroughly outmatched, just talent-wise. Before they even took the field, it would have taken a Herculean effort for that offense to crack through. And it highlights a lot of problems they have, just talent-wise, personnel-wise. But I thought most of the loss was not on coaching in that game. I thought it was more so the personnel just being so thoroughly outmatched on the offensive side of the football.
Yeah, no doubt. There was, whenever you watch these games and you're into them, and I actually bet the Steelers Monday night plus the 3, but I've got a futures wager on Houston. So I was kind of hoping for like a Houston 1 or 2 point win. That aside, when they had the ball back after a 3-0 lead, end of the first quarter after that first Stroud fumble, and DK Metcalf has a ball in his hands for about a 35-yard play in field goal range again, I know that you look back at the end, although it was 7-6 going into the fourth quarter, and you see a dominant performance. And I'm not saying that Pittsburgh would have won the game, but it would have been a different game in the first half had Metcalf just made that catch.
There's no doubt about it. The Steelers needed to get out to a fast start in that game to buoy themselves for later in the game. There's no question.
And had a chance.
Right. And they had a chance. I mean, listen, it would have been at least 35 yards. If he breaks the tackle, he's gone. To be a touchdown. I mean, that would have been a huge play for the Steelers. Would have been up, 13 to 7 probably at the half at that point, probably something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
A lot different. A lot different than playing from behind, And so I do think that would have been a big change because, the Steelers defense, for as kind of frustrating as they've been this year, and, the historic talk preseason never came to fruition, they did play their hearts out really for the first 3 quarters. They struggled against the run, but they buckled down when they needed to. They forced 3 turnovers. You can't really ask for much more from a defense like that, 3 turnovers in a game and you only get 3 points off it. That's got to be frustrating for the Steelers, and it could have buoyed them into the fourth quarter. That's the upset formula. You muck it up, you get a turnover or 2, you jump out to an early lead, and you shock them. That's how you win in a game like that. That's how the Steelers went to New England and beat the Patriots. 5 turnovers, got out to a 14-0 start, got a late touchdown, 121-14 in a big upset of the season. So that's exactly the formula they needed to beat Houston. They just didn't capitalize on their chances.
Yeah, it's funny. When they beat the Patriots, that was so early. We didn't know what it would look like because the Patriots had lost to the Raiders like the week before. All right, let's talk about Tomlin. So the overall reaction of, let's just say, the majority of Pittsburgh Steeler fans is what?
I think that there's a feeling of gratitude and relief at the same time. That's what I would say. There's not a lot of venom towards Mike Tomlin. I don't think there can be. You look at the resume he's put together with Pittsburgh, even though the last decade has been futile with playoff victories. I think that in regards to the beginning of his career with the Steelers, he came out red hot. He elevated a team that was 8-8 under Bill Cowher, and in the second season won the Super Bowl, went back to another one 2 years later, won 8 division titles, never had a losing season. They were relevant every single year Mike Tomlin was head coach. I think they played all of 2 games during his 19-year tenure that did not have playoff implications for their own team. That to me just speaks to the volume of consistency Mike Tomlin is. And so I think there is gratitude for that. He made the Steelers relevant every year. It didn't matter how bad the roster was. It didn't matter what phase of the quarterback rebuild they were in. They were competitive. On the other hand, they just could not win a playoff game. It was capped at 10-7 in a playoff loss. And I think there's some thought to, is it okay once in a while for the Steelers just to have a bad year and try and get that quarterback? They need some type of a reset. I think the voice in the room with Mike Tomlin gave them a high floor, but a low ceiling. He had a big say in personnel decisions. So I don't want to say the Steelers just didn't give him anything on the personnel side. He created that bed for himself in large respect. And so there is a relief off your shoulders for Steelers fans, because I think we've been watching the same thing for about 8 to 9 years. But I also think you look at the consistency, the bastion of winning that Mike Tomlin created. And how can you not have gratitude for that? He is a gold jacket Hall of Fame coach, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. You said something that's just amazing. Is that true that there were only 2 games in his 19-year career, and I would assume it was the final game of 2 seasons where they were actually eliminated from playoff contention? Only 2?
Yeah, they went in 2012 and 2013. They went 8-8, and both of those years, their final game, they were out of playoff contention. And those were the only 2 games throughout his entire tenure where the Steelers did not have a playoff implication in a game. Crazy to think about, but
that's insanity. I mean, you know that no losing season, so you would assume, but yeah, it would have to be an 8-8 or a 9-8, or an 8-8 going into the final game with the 17-game schedule for that to make sense. So we are talking to Nick Farabaugh, covers the Steelers for Penn Live in Pittsburgh. So what's next?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. And the Steelers, I think, have a type when they hire these head coaches. And you've seen it with Knoll, you've seen it with Cowher, and you've seen it with Tomlin. Young, assertive, defensive-minded head coach. That is what they look at, an assistant that maybe isn't always heralded. I mean, Mike Tomlin was a 34-year-old, first-time defensive coordinator coming off a 6-10 football team with the Minnesota Vikings when he was hired. So it's not always going to be the common guy. Just because Brian Flores is a very good defensive mind doesn't mean the Steelers are going to be 100% in on him. I think they will be. But I think that's where you start. You start at, Chris Shula. You start at guys like Brian Flores. You start Jesse Minter. These names that are younger, up-and-coming guys that are the hot names of the head coaching cycle. That's what it feels like to me. I don't think they're going to do a retread. I think they're going to follow the same model they have. The real question is, does the defensive part of that continue, or do they switch to the offensive side of the ball? There are a few interesting young offensive minds. Maybe they're a year or 2 away, but do the Steelers jump on it early? I'm thinking of guys like Nathan Shieldhouse from the Rams, the pass game coordinator over there. No play calling experience, but the Steelers have not been against making bold hires. I think of Grant Udinsky, who is Liam Cohen's offensive coordinator in Jacksonville, just 30 years old. I think of names like that. Those are Tomlin-ish hires where you don't see them really coming out of anywhere. And so I think that for the Steelers is casting a wide net and figuring out exactly what they want. But they have a few really cool options that fit right into their prototype for a head coach.
It's not other than organization, culture, fan base, all top-notch, first rate. It's not attractive otherwise. Is that fair?
I think it is. I mean, let's look at this. They don't have a clear path to a quarterback. I think that is the first thing. This roster is not going to be bad enough to get a top 5 pick in the next 2 years. They're just not. And they're not going to tear it down. That's not an organizational philosophy. Art Rooney will not stand for a coach that says, I want to tear it down and tank for 2 years. It's just not going to happen. So they don't have a clear path to a quarterback. The defense is aging. You think about guys like Watt, Ramsey, Hayward, even though Hayward is just unbelievable still. These guys are aging out, but they do have some young pieces, and the Steelers are not completely barren. They have a young offensive line. They have a young defensive line outside of Hayward. They have a few guys outside of that I think are good cornerstone pieces, guys like Joey Porter Jr., Darnell Washington, Jalen Warren. There's a few pieces there that you can work with. And so the cupboard's not completely bare. But you look at, this compared to, let's say, the Ravens job. I'll take Lamar Jackson every time.
Yeah.
You can argue to take the Giants job. Jackson Dart is there. They have a young quarterback. There's just things there. But the real thing with the Steelers is they're going to give you unlimited stability and time.
Yep.
I think that's the rare thing. They will give you time to enact your plan. So even though there's not a quarterback here, the Steelers are going to say, okay, we'll give you enough time to set up a plan to get that quarterback. So you don't have to win, big in the first 2 years. You don't have to win a Super Bowl just because Mike Tomlin left. If you are competitive and keep the team afloat and look competitive, I think that will be something that the Steelers will find attractive. So I think that's one big thing. They give you stability and unlimited time that maybe jobs just don't do nowadays. And you get to put your stamp on the roster. The defensive roster, especially if you're a defensive coach with how old this roster is, you can turn that over and really put your own stamp on it. So you can have a lot of roster control and building, which I also think that control and power is going to be attractive to some candidates.
I mean, Tomlin, I talked about this, 2 years left on his deal, so they're not going to let him just go coach without compensation, correct?
Correct. If he doesn't come back before the 2027, if he comes back after the 2027 season now, he can get scot-free. But do I see Mike Tomlin taking 2 years off of coaching football? Personally, I don't. I think he takes this year off. I think he goes to do TV for a year. And then I think he comes back with a vengeance. So I think he looks at, I think a job like Tampa Bay, for example, would be one he would be really excited to take. I think of jobs that might open up where there's a quarterback next year. Cincinnati, for example, that one might be tenuous. I think of jobs like that. But yes, I think a trade scenario is absolutely on the table if he comes back next year. I don't think he's going to coach this year. He's made that clear to team. So I think next year, if he comes back, the Steelers are going to get a very similar compensation, maybe even more than what the Saints got for Sean Payton. The Saints got a first and second round pick for Sean Payton and a third. The Steelers might be able to get more for Mike Tomlin than they got for Sean Payton. So it's going to be a pretty significant draft compensation haul if Mike Tomlin comes back next year and the Steelers trade him somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get the Raiders #1 overall if the Raiders wanted to hire him. They're not giving up Fernando Mendoza for Mike Tomlin. But yeah, that's interesting. I had forgotten what the Saints got back for Sean Payton. Last one, and I appreciate the time. I know you've got a Rooney press conference to get to, but Tomlin, I think the assumption is he'll be great on television. You've dealt with him over the years. You know what he is just from afar. I mean, it's always entertaining, but he's sometimes is a man of very few words as well. So which is it? Is he going to be great on TV? Have you guys talked about that? What do you view? How do you project Tomlin as a TV personality talking about the league?
It's always been funny talking to Mike about TV because he said he would never want to peel back the pieces of his secret sauce. That's always been the thing. That's why he doesn't want to do TV. But you don't have to necessarily do that. You can easily stay in the lane of entertaining storyteller. And that's what Mike is. Mike is probably one of the most gifted storytellers I've ever met. The stories I've heard about Derek Brooks and Rondé Barber and other guys from his coaching tree and his career under Dungy and this come up is really incredible. And it gives you really kind of a piece of the puzzle. And there's not a sauce that Mike Tomlin has schematically that he'd be giving away. So if you want him to break down X's and O's, I think he'd be excellent at that. I've seen Mike do it. Mike is a very underrated X's and O's explainer. He makes it feel like you're 5 years old and explaining a complex thing to you very easily. Yeah. He's going to do great on TV. He's not going to reveal what he does behind the scenes culturally because I think that's what makes him great, the relationship building side of it. But Mike is going to be great on TV if he decides to go that route. Because he is a very intelligent, easy explainer, and his ability to tell stories that fit into a life lesson or a lesson about the game is unparalleled. I've really never seen someone do it. And I don't think people will get that from a press conference. It's when you talk to him off the record. It's when you talk to him in a bar in Indianapolis, somewhere like that, where you just hear what a special orator Mike Tomlin is and why guys flock to him and love playing for him. He'll do the same thing on TV and really be a magnet in that way.
That's really interesting insight. And look, if he called games, he doesn't need to reveal his secret, sauce, answers. If he's calling a game, it would be more on a set, at ESPN or NFL Network, et cetera, where, more of the personality comes through. Thanks for doing this, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Kevin. I appreciate it as always.
Yep, Nick Farabaugh, everybody. They're looking for a new coach for the first time in 19 seasons. 15 for Cower before that, and 23 for Knoll. I mean, crazy longevity for those three guys. Chuck Knoll was hired in 1969, obviously won 4 Super Bowls. And then you had, Bill Cower, Hall of Famer. He was there for 15 seasons as the Steelers head coach. And then Tomlin for the last 19. Crazy. I mean, Cower's 15 was brief in comparison. Cower, too, remember, was a very sought after, at the time, a sought after defensive coordinator. Tomlin was a little bit more obscure when they hired him. I think Nick's probably right. It's probably like a Minter, somebody like that, a defensive young guy. But Minter is obviously going to be up for jobs, so they may have some competition. But that's an organization where if you get hired, they're going to be patient. That's for sure. All right, up next, I want to get to some of my thoughts on David Blau. We talked a little bit about Blau on Monday for sure, but I've got more on Blau when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. From Devin. Devin writes, lifelong Vikings fan here. You can have Brian Flores. He gambles too much for me. In the Vikings' biggest games the last couple of years, the defense has come up 0. See Detroit and Rams last year. Yeah, I mean, I remember the Detroit game at the end of last year. I remember Sam Darnold pretty much soiling himself in the Rams game. And also in that Detroit game, didn't Sam Darnold, basically throw incomplete pass on like multiple fourth downs in the red zone, just either getting sacked or firing the ball away indiscriminately? I mean, I'm looking at the box score right now. I'm pulling it up right now. Sam Darnold was 18 of 41 in that game for 166 yards against a Detroit defense that 2 weeks later got absolutely shredded by Washington. Yeah, I see. Yeah, Jared Goff went nuts. Jahmyr Gibbs went off. It's a really good offensive team they face, but in Detroit. In the Rams game, that was the game Darnold got sacked like 10 times. I mean, I'm looking at that box score right now. 9 times Sam Darnold got sacked in that Rams playoff game. I mean, defensively, it wasn't like the Rams went off. They had less than 300 yards. It was just there were 2 turnovers and 9 sacks. It was the Ram defense that won that game. Look, it doesn't matter. I mean, Brian Flores is not going to be available. I think that he's going to stay in Minnesota unless he gets a head coaching job. I mean, they'd be nuts to let him go. I mean, you're a Vikings fan, Devin, so on some level, I hear what you're saying. He does gamble a lot. There's a lot going on at the line of scrimmage for teams to figure out. He does blitz a lot. Seemed like in our game we weren't prepared for it. That was one of those Kingsbury games that really, I think, may have, if it wasn't already in the works, it sped up after that game as far as Kingsbury goes, because it wasn't just the play sequence at the end of the first drive, second, third, fourth down, throwing the ball after they had rushed for 8 yards a carry with Chris Rodriguez on their opening drive. It was the pass protection. They had no plan for Brian Flores' pass protection, and they knew he was going to come after him. That was a disappointment for sure, as far as some of the Cliff criticism this year, because he wasn't void of it. I even though I think he got more out of less this year, doesn't mean that I didn't think there were moments in which he could have done better, and he admitted that game was not a good game for him. So anyway, Devin, thanks for the note, appreciate it, but it's really a moot point. Brian Flores is not going to leave Minnesota unless it's for a head coaching job. I would assume the only way he would is if you throw so much money at him that he can't turn it down. And Washington looks better in terms of their offense than Minnesota does right now. Minnesota's got a big question mark at quarterback. So after the show on Monday, and I wasn't here yesterday, I had something of a commitment that I had to take care of. And again, appreciate Toby sitting in. I had a few conversations with various people about Blau. I think, the question now that he's hired is, what's the offense going to look like? It's impossible to know for sure. It's not like we have a history of David Blau coordinating, an offense and calling plays. It's not like we can go back to, the 2022 Jacksonville team where he was an OC. We don't have any of that. He's never done it before. So you have to pull from his experiences. I think I talked about, on Monday's show, some of the things that maybe some of you don't know about David Blau, one of which is he was a hell of a college quarterback his final year at Purdue, playing for Jeff Brom, who is an offensive guru as a head coach in college football. He had quite the senior year at Purdue before not going drafted in that particular draft, signing eventually with Detroit and bouncing around. And we know that his exposure in the NFL, it started with Darrell Bevell, who was the offensive coordinator in 2019, when Blau actually started the final 5 games of 2019 because Matt Stafford and the backup, Jeff Driscoll, Jeff Driscoll, both of them, were hurt. And so Blau started the last 5 games. Darrell Bevell was the offensive coordinator with Matt Patricia as the head coach. Ben Johnson was a professional exposure for him. Kevin O'Connell was a professional exposure for him. He was in Minnesota for nearly a year. And of course, Cliff Kingsbury on 2 counts, once in Arizona, where he quarterbacked a game or 2 at the end of a season for Cliff Kingsbury when he was the head coach. And of course, the 2 seasons here with Blau on Cliff's staff. So those are the influences. Jeff Brom, by the way, I'm sure is an influence as well. But in terms of the pro influences, it's, Cliff Kingsbury, Ben Johnson, Kevin O'Connell, and Darrell Bevell. When Ben brought up Darrell Bevell's name the other day on the show as somebody who could be brought in, I thought that was a very interesting thing. Now, they have requested an interview, or maybe they've already interviewed DJ Williams, the quarterback coach in Atlanta, who's been helping Michael Penix develop. And also, I will tell you, Kirk Cousins, a fan of DJ Williams. He is the son of, our legend, Doug Williams. DJ Williams has been reached out to and hopefully will be interviewed. They need a quarterbacks coach. They need an offensive line coach. They need an assistant quarterbacks coach, with Blau, taking 2 steps up and Tavita Pritchard getting the head coaching job at Stanford. But when you try to consider what Blau's offense will be, it's kind of hard to know, other than to just take from the experiences that he's had. So for me, in thinking about it and in talking to some people, there's one thing more than any other that I would guess, I don't know for sure, that I would guess will be a part of the offense and wasn't with Cliff. And I think that part will be a significant increase in play action pass attempts, married to a run game married to a play action passing game with Jaden Daniels. Why? Well, his experiences with Ben Johnson and Kevin O'Connell, way up there on the list of guys that throw via play action more than anybody else. Detroit was number 1 under Ben Johnson in 2024 on play action pass attempts. They were 3rd this year without Ben Johnson, but Chicago this year with Ben Johnson, 2nd in the league with Caleb Williams in play action pass attempts. Minnesota, Kevin O'Connell, 3rd last year when they had Sam Darnold. This year they were 11th. I mean, they had some quarterback issues. By contrast, the 2 years that Blau spent here in Washington with Cliff Kingsbury, Washington was 20th in the NFL in 2024 in play action pass attempts. They were 28th this year. And play action off of a marriage, if you will, to the run game, and that run game can be versatile. It can be a lot of zone, which is what Adam Peters obviously saw a lot of in San Francisco, inside zone, outside zone, but it can be a lot of power. It can be a lot of gap as well. But I think a run game tied to a top 5 to top 10, worst case, play action pass attempt team is, for me, the one thing that I'd be surprised if we don't see with David Blau as the coordinator and the play caller. I'm not sure anybody can really know beyond that. Yes, there will be an element of, creativity and trickery if he's taking a lot from Ben Johnson. But I think what we've seen here for 2 years is we've seen the lower end of a run game married to a play action pass team. There are many different ways. Okay, they were 20th in the league in play action pass attempts in 2024, but they were a top 3 to top 5 defense, worst case, in the league. There are a lot of different ways to be great offensively. We saw it in 2024, but I think this is what Quinn wants, and this is what Blau has been exposed to prior to the 2 years with Cliff. That, to me, would be the surprise. I think predicting anything else about what Blau will do when you don't have an actual, resume of being a coordinator or a play caller is difficult to determine, but that to me is the one. And I think would love Jaden in almost any offense. By the way, will that happen more under center or more in pistol? Play action passing really doesn't happen as much out of shotgun in terms of the traditional turn your back at least a bit to the defense play action, which is more effective. Typically, play action under center, you turn your back, the defense loses sight of the football, especially with good ball handling quarterbacks in terms of play fakes. And the pistol, you turn your back to a certain degree. Shotgun is more of a mesh. The ball's always exposed in play action. But with a back behind you, and that's the pistol. Remember, shotgun back is by your side or isn't there at all, an empty set. Pistol is a back directly behind the quarterback. So even though he's not under center, snap comes and he turns to hand off or turns to play fake. That's why you've seen the Rams have a lot of pistol and play action. They're under center for a lot of their play action, but there's a lot of play action from pistol with Matt Stafford as well. There's a lot of, and there was last year in particular, and even with Penix Jr. in Atlanta, Zach Robinson from the Sean McVay Shanahan tree, a lot of pistol where, people complain Kirk wasn't under center last year. That's where he's been most effective. Well, he was in pistol with play action, but they just actually didn't run as much play action as they had in the past. That was more the issue. But you can play action effectively out of pistol. That's what I think is going to be the most noticeable thing. And maybe it'll end up being that there's no hurry up or less hurry up, less up tempo, less no huddle. And that would be noticeable, obviously, if they end up going that route, if he ends up going that route. But I don't have any guess on that. Pace of play is more important than whether or not you huddle, into a defense. Now, when you huddle, the substitutions sometimes come a little bit faster. When you no huddle, sometimes they come a little bit slower. Not always. But maybe under center, no huddle, those are the things that are more noticeable. But I think in terms of scheme and what happens post-snap, I think marrying run game to pass game, specifically play action passes, that's going to be a big part of the attack. And it hasn't been for 2 years. Yeah. And, just one more on this whole conversation of Blau. It's bold, but I'm okay with it as a fan of the team. I think Cliff did a good job here because he did a good job here. They even know he did a good job there. It's just a philosophical difference. They're moving on from it. I'm okay with not letting the next big thing, if that's how they view him. And by the way, they're not the only ones that view him that way. Let's not forget that there were teams last year that wanted to talk to Blau. Washington blocked those interview opportunities. This year, Detroit wanted to interview him for their OC job. He was a guy that was sought after. There are a lot of people, not just here, but around the league, that believe that David Blau, like the guy in Jacksonville and a couple of others, could be the next big thing, could be the next Ben Johnson or Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay. Not wanting him to leave the building, I think, has always been in the back of Dan Quinn and Adam Peters' mind from the moment he said yes to their offer to be the assistant quarterbacks coach. I think that they saw a world in which Cliff left after a year or two to take a head coaching job, and Blau became the OC. I believe that if Blau weren't here and Tavita Pritchard had moved on, that Cliff might still be here. Now, if Cliff wasn't going to evolve to where they wanted to see offensively, scheme-wise, maybe that was always in the cards that he was going to move on. But I think Blau being in the building made this possible as much as anything else did. He just has to be right about it. Because I do believe this, even though it's hard to fast forward, to the end of the year and project what that context would look like around a losing season or a non-playoff season. But as we sit here now, the seat's much warmer than it was. When you swap out after 2 years, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, both of whom were among your first hires as a head coach, then you can't afford for those hires, specifically on offense, because he's replacing a guy that was successful offensively, which makes the move bold. That's why the move's bold. It's bold in part because he's never been a coordinator, but we see that all the time. People identified as talents and being elevated from quarterbacks coach to OC or from another position to OC, O-line coach, whatever it is. But what makes it really bold is they're moving on from a successful offensive coordinator. So he better be right, because that warms the job security seat, in my opinion. And here's the other thing too, man. For this franchise, you don't want your third-year quarterback to be playing with a new coordinator that was bold and doesn't work out, because then it looks like a throwaway year and he's into year 4 already. So the decision needs to be the right one. I think they're very confident that it is. Of course, talk is cheap, and they're not talking about it, not yet anyway. We'll hear about that at some point. But they've got to make this work. Looking forward to it. They need a few more pieces, and they need a lot better luck when it comes to their best players being on the field. And like I've said multiple times since the season ended, they need the defense to improve significantly. That impacts the offense. The offense can't take the field for a third straight season knowing that if they don't go for 27 or 28 plus, they're probably going to lose the game. That can't be the environment that you put the offense in for a third straight year. When we come back, Steve Sands from the Golf Channel will jump on with me. Brooks Koepka is back on the PGA Tour. But it's also interesting to find out who the PGA Tour won't accept back and who they will. That's next. All right, joining me right now is Steve Sands. He'd rather talk about our football team's hires, maybe some Maryland basketball, not really, but we're going to talk to him about Brooks Koepka being back on the PGA Tour, which really kicks off this weekend out in Hawaii. Steve will be on the call for the Golf Channel all weekend long. All right, so explain to everybody who's not paying attention why Brooks Koepka is back on the PGA Tour and how it happened.
Well, I think he was never happy at LIV after he left the PGA Tour. And I think he wanted to come back to the PGA Tour, and he found an avenue, signed a contract with LIV, ended up getting out of it 1 year early. I'm assuming he paid a hefty price for that. And then he came back to the PGA Tour and, said, hey, what do we have? And the PGA Tour decided kind of quickly to gather up some information and put out a note for John Rahm, Bryson DeChambeau, Cam Smith, and Brooks Koepka. Those four players, and those four players only, who had won majors or players championships since 2022, that they had an avenue back to the PGA Tour without a suspension, by the way, which was a big thing for the rank and file of the PGA Tour. He had to pay a $5 million number to any charity of his choice. He has to sit out of the equity stake of the PGA Tour for the next 5 years, which could be a significant number. There are a couple of other things here and there. He's not in the signature events, but for the most part, he's back. He'll be teeing it up in a couple of weeks at Torrey Pines at the Farmers Insurance Open. The other three guys, by the way, said no yesterday. So Brooks is the only one of the four who will be back in 2026 on the PGA Tour for now.
Explain to me what the equity stake reference was. I'm not familiar with it.
So when this all nonsense happened 4 years ago with LIV, the PGA Tour, overreacted, however you want to call it, with these huge signature events, these big purses, smaller fields, no cuts, a lot of those events. And the other thing was they brought in a group, SSG, a conglomerate of a lot of people involved with the Fenway Group. Sam Kennedy, if you're familiar with him, who runs the Boston Red Sox, and the Fenway Group. They pumped in about $1.5 billion in private equity money. And what that meant was the PGA Tour was going to kind of split in half, not for the competition, but for the finances. There's the tournament side and there's the tour side. And then there's the for-profit side. The PGA Tour is, with charitable, I don't know if it's 501(c) or 503C or 401(c), whatever those letters and numbers are, they do it not for profit. Well, they set up a for-profit side for the PGA Tour. And the players who stayed, and as opposed to taking the money and going to LIV, became equity owners in the PGA Tour. And the larger your stake is, the better off you are as far as, your World Golf ranking and how many wins you've had and how many times you've played and all those kinds of formulas to formulate that. So in other words, Scotty Scheffler and Rory McIlroy would be the highest stake owners. Well, a guy like Brooks Koepka, Kevin, would be a huge, huge number for him if he was an equity, owner, but he is not allowed to do that for 5 years. So does it cost him any money? No, but it does prevent him from making tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on the side.
What did Koepka get from LIV?
He got 9 figures. I don't know the exact amount, but I do know it was 9 figures. So it was north of $100 million.
And you said DeChambeau, Rahm, and Cam Smith have all said no, but you also said that those are the only 3 that have been given an avenue back to the PGA Tour. So none of the other LIV players who are former PGA Tour players have that path back?
Exactly. And the notable exception to that is Phil Mickelson. Phil Mickelson's one of the top 10 players in the history of the sport. He is a lifetime member of the PGA Tour. Now, he gave up that membership, and he was part of that lawsuit with the PGA Tour. But they took a shot at Phil because they started this program with one caveat. You had to have won a Players or a major since 2022. Remember, he won a major at north of 50 years of age.
Yeah.
But it was just before 2022. So they didn't allow him to have that avenue. Now, those guys who said no yesterday have until February 2nd to truly make their final decision. The deadline the PGA Tour gave those 4 players was February 2nd. It's only January 14th. So they still have some time to try to negotiate their way out of the LIV contract if they choose to. But yesterday, those 3 players said they will not do that.
You know me, I don't watch the LIV Tour. I don't know anybody else that watches the LIV Tour. I wouldn't know where to find the LIV Tour on TV on a weekend. I have no idea who's performed well and who hasn't, other than the obvious, which is the gobs of money that everybody got. Was it worth it for these players?
Well, I guess financially it was worth it. Career-wise, it just depends. You know, like I'm a big believer, and you and I have talked about this on and off the air. My favorite thing about watching professional athletes perform is that they're just so darn great at their craft, and they're more competitive than any other human beings on the planet. And those two combinations make for an incredible competition. The pressure, you know, all ratcheting up, the big time events, how they handle it, those kinds of things. And they're void of that. Now, those 4 players, Brooks included, are allowed to play in the major championship because they are not under the auspice of the PGA Tour. However, that's going to run out at some point as far as their eligibility. And to me, I think the guys who went over there who were 45, 50 years old, Lee Westwood, Hendrick, Stenson, Ian Poulter, those guys, hey, I don't blame them for that. They were cashing out. They were at the end of their careers. They were never going to be competitive at the major championships again. For the John Rahms, Bryson DeChambeaus, Cam Smiths, Brooks Koepkas, to me, they've wasted a lot of time in their prime while they've been doing this. And I feel like they just kind of cashed out as opposed to stayed with that competitive drive that made them how great they truly are in the sport. It's just a shame to me that what's happened. So whether it's worth it or not, to me and you, is different to them. To us, of course, $100 million is a lot of money, and that'd be very, very difficult to turn down. But you can make that on the PGA Tour if you perform at your regular standard, if you're one of those 4 guys. And I think Brooks Koepka quickly realized that, and I think he's going to try to, you know, get back into the good graces of the players, good graces of the fans, and also in the good graces of the greatest events in the world of golf, which not only include the majors, but also some big-time PGA Tour events.
So if Dustin Johnson or a Paul Casey or a Patrick Reed, if they wanted back on the PGA Tour, the answer is no still.
The answer is no right now. February 2nd, the deadline for those 4 players only. Dustin and all the other guys right now are boxed out.
Crazy. Well, you said the 4 players, including Koepka, you meant.
Yes, Koepka's one. He decided to go.
DeChambeau, Cam Smith, and John Rahm.
The DeChambeau thing is the most fascinating thing to me, Kevin. His contract is up. He is by far the biggest star over there. And now that one player in that big, huge, 4 or 5 group has decided to go and that LIV let him out of his contract, which is a big thing, by the way, DeChambeau now has all the leverage in the world to get whatever he wants from them. If they want to continue with LIV without the biggest names in the sport, they're going to have a very hard time. And Bryson knows that. Bryson said something interesting yesterday. He said, after this year, whether I'm here or not, blah, 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 blah. I was like, wow, it was pretty telling when he said that.
Yeah. All right. I know you're heading out. I appreciate you doing this. Did you want to weigh in on David Blau being elevated to offensive coordinator or anything about the defensive coordinator search? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would love to see Brian Flores. That's the first thing. If he doesn't get a head coaching job, I think he would be the best candidate as far as a defensive coordinator is concerned. That's my personal opinion.
Yep.
He's a fabulous defensive coach. And I don't know if the NFL is ready to give him another shot at a head coaching job after all the mess in Miami. But he is an outstanding defensive coordinator. On the offensive side, I think David was basically not that Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay and the other guys like Mike McDaniel who have been in the organization and went on to have success elsewhere as head coaches, scared the current administration at the at the Commanders. I almost called them the Redskins. At the Commanders.
Nothing wrong with that.
Boy, it does. I know, I'm with you. But it does smell like that. I feel like David, deserves his shot. And I think that, the Shanahan and McVay and all the other guys who got out of the O'Connell as well, got out of the building and were not elevated inside of the organization, perhaps scared them a little bit. And I think David is deserving of his shot to run the offense. And I hope that he, gets Jaden under center a little bit, makes some changes as far as some of the things that they do offensively, and elevates the team. And one more thing, by the way, and I know you don't want to talk about this. Maryland basketball last night.
Yeah, I watched
played
it.
Southern Cal. Hold on, Southern Cal, Kevin. I thought about this, and I thought about you because I knew we were going to speak today. 2 years ago, USC football was a 7-point favorite, and Maryland beat them 29-28.
Right.
USC football was a 7-point favorite. Last night, USC basketball was a 9.5-point favorite over Maryland basketball. Think about that. How far Maryland basketball has fallen, that USC football is a lesser favorite than USC basketball against our beloved Terps.
Well, we were in this. We were in the Sweet 16 just 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago. 10
I
months
understand,
or whatever it was.
but it's not pretty.
No, it's not pretty. You know what? In this era of basically losing rosters and having to build them up and build them from scratch, I think we got to give it some time. But there is no doubt we are in the midst of the worst Maryland basketball season of our lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, they just got rid of Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh. Okay, both organizations who are great organizations. All right, think about the longevity, the consistency, and the excellence and the standard. Now, did they meet the standard all those times? No, but they never had anything like what Maryland basketball is going through right now. It's just a really, really bad time for Maryland basketball. But I think that Buzz will turn it around. I think that they're going to get the players back in there. I'm just afraid of the apathy. I was in the building last Wednesday.
Yeah, I know.
For
Came
the
up to
Indiana,
go.
for the Indiana game. Yeah, I mean, I thought we were going to connect there, but it's the apathy, Kevin.
Yes.
I mean,
I was apathetic that night. Yeah.
Right. And the apathy's tough. I mean, me, you, and Scott talk about this all the time. You cannot have apathy. That's worse than losing. And the building was nonchalant, if you will, for our standard as far as fan bases go. And I just can't stand that. That just drives me.
Yeah, it's a
pro
market now.
We'll watch every.
It's a pro sports market now. That's the difference.
You and I are wackos. We'll watch every game.
I stayed up and watched last night.
Of course.
Diggy Coit was going off. They had a lead in the second half, but that evaporated quickly.
They didn't.
Yeah. All right.
It's a pro town. I get it, by the way. I get it. I'm not sure what the Trae Young trade is all about, but the Caps won last night, so we're happy right now.
All right. We got a golf weekend coming up, and you'll be a part of the call all weekend long on Golf Channel. Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Should be fun. Can't wait to get it started.
Steve Sands, everybody. Yeah, Max asked me before, earlier in the show or off the air, did I stay up and watch the Terps last night? I did. I did stay up and watch the Terps. Game didn't tip off till 10:45. I'm not a go to bed early guy. I'm not a guy that talks
you don't
about
sleep,
it's on too late. I can't stay up. That's never been me. I'll stay up and not complain about getting enough sleep. There's so much apathy right now, and this 10 months after they made the Sweet 16 for the first time in 8 years or 9 years or whatever it was last year. It's tough to come in as a new coach and have no players available and swap out an entire roster. And by the way, in his defense, Buzz's defense, his best player has been hurt now for pretty much the entirety of the Big Ten schedule. But Maryland is 0 in the Big Ten. They're 0-6. I don't know if they're going to win a Big Ten game. This is legitimately the worst season in the making in my lifetime of being a Maryland guy. Going back to Lefty, even Gary's probation teams weren't this bad record-wise. And the problem is they're not close Like, they're trying hard. I give them all the credit in the world. They were up last night in the second half. And against UCLA on Saturday night, a game that was up against Packers-Bears, so I barely even watched it. They were down 5 at one point in the second half. But they've lost their last 4 games by double digits, all 4 Big Ten games. It's not good. They get Penn State this weekend. That's a game I think they can win. Penn State's pretty bad, but they nearly knocked off Michigan the other night. All right, when we come back, the best team right now in the DMV, I'll tell you who that is. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, the team980.com. Don't forget, you can listen to us wherever you are, whenever you want, by downloading the Odyssey app, and you can watch this program on our Team 980 YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button and hit the like button when you get there.
is on the bench, which is huge for the Seahawks. Hasselbeck looking for a receiver, and it's tipped away and almost picked off by Carlos Rogers. Maurice Morris flaring from the backfield.
20 years ago today, the closest Washington ever got before last year to an NFC championship game happened in that moment. 20 years ago today, Washington at Seattle for a divisional round playoff game after beating Tampa in the wild card round with not a lot of offense that day. That was Joe Gibbs' year 2. That was a Mark Brunell-led team. That was the year that they went with the 2 touchdowns, Brunell to Santana Moss, Monday Night Miracle, early September. They went into the postseason after beating the Eagles and the Giants and a few other teams down the stretch to get to the playoffs. And they managed a whopping 120 yards of total offense, just 25 net passing yards, which is the fewest ever in a playoff win. But they beat Tampa 17-10. And then the following week in Seattle, up 3-0 with LeVar Arrington having already knocked the MVP, Sean Alexander, out of the game, knocked him out of the game. And Carlos Rogers, before he got LASIK, true story, he ended up getting LASIK after he left Washington and went to San Francisco, where he became an interception machine. But in Washington, he had bad vision. And that ball that Hasselbeck threw, it was a throw across the field, and Carlos Rogers had it in his hands for the easiest pick 6 ever, which would have given Washington a 10-0 lead midway through the second quarter. God, their defense was good that year. That was the last time, I think, we had a legitimate good defense. I mean, Marcus Washington, Cornelius Griffin, LeVar, Sean Taylor, Ryan Clark. Ryan Clark, they should have never let him go for Adam Archuleta. Joe Salavea. Remember Demetric Evans, Sean Springs. The combination of Springs and Rogers and Taylor. They had Stoutmeyer coming off the bench. They had Matt Bowen on that team. That was a defense. That's the best defense, seriously, of the last since 91. The 2022 defense was pretty good, but we've had so many bad defensive teams. I think the 05 defense and maybe the 07 defense was really good. Carlos Rogers, 20 years ago today, January 14th, 2006, had a pick 6 in his hands. And I'm going to tell you right now, that game, the way it went, up 10-0 in Seattle, no way would they have lost that game. Their defense was too good. They had the running game with Portis. Brunell wasn't right physically entering that postseason, but they would have been good enough to advance to the NFC Championship game had Rodgers held on to that. And that NFC Championship game would have been played at Carolina. Carolina ended up facing Seattle that year in the NFC title game. That was a Jake Delhomme team, Steve Smith Sr. Washington could have gotten to a Super Bowl in 2005 if Carlos Rogers just hung on to that ball. Man, that seems like yesterday. I know it's a long time ago, but I remember that season so well. It was the first season for me being on radio talking about the Skins. I had a show right here at 980 called Redskins Overtime. It followed the official postgame show, which I think Andy did with Zabe maybe. And then I did a show that was a 1-hour show following the actual pregame show. And I remember thinking, wow, they were so close in that game to something that we hadn't seen at that point, 2006. It had been 10 years since, it had been 14 years since they had been in Super Bowl 26 and having gone to an NFC title game. Yeah, Carlos Rogers, he had bad vision. They figured it out in San Francisco. He got LASIK, and he started to catch all of those interceptions. Sean Springs and I have talked about this, or maybe Santana and I have talked about this. But interception-wise, in Washington, he had, I think, something. I'm looking at it right now. In Washington, he had 6 interceptions in 6 seasons. He had it once he got to San Francisco, he had 9 in his first 3 seasons. And it was all because he got LASIK and could see. I can see. Couldn't see that day. Cost him a trip to the NFC Championship game. Hey, before we get out of here, I want to mention this. Last night, George Mason won again. George Mason is 17-1 on the season. They beat Loyola Chicago. We had Tony Skinn on the show last week. This is the best ever start for George Mason regular season-wise and in the Atlantic 10, any conference they've ever been in. They're 5-0 in the A10. They beat Loyola Chicago 82-74 on the road. It was their first ever win at Loyola Chicago, who, remember, got to a Final Four a few years back. And they're 17-1, and they did get votes this week, top 25 votes in the Associated Press. They did not get any in the coaches poll, but they got a couple of them, 8 votes in the Associated Press. If they keep winning, George Mason is going to have itself a chance without winning the tournament of getting a bid to the NCAA tournament. Right now, I'm looking, there are 2 other A10 teams that are undefeated. They're the only 5-0 team in the A10. Dayton is 4-0, and St. Louis is 3-0. St. Louis is 15-1. Mason is 17-1. They play Dayton not until mid-February, and they don't play St. Louis until the season finale. They play those 2 teams just once, and they don't play them until mid-February, and St. Louis late at the end of the season. That could be for the A10 regular season title. Long way to go. They have GW on Monday at home at 5 o'clock. Go George Mason. They're the only not a bad year to do it either, because Maryland's having the worst season they've had in 50 years. And Georgetown lost a heartbreaker last night to Creighton. I do have to mention Creighton's good. Georgetown hung in there. But the Hoyas are struggling big time as well. Their record falls to 9-8 and 1-5 in the Big East. All right, that's it for the day. Chris is next. Back tomorrow.